So,
Okay. Hello, everybody. I think everyone's slowly coming in. And I think I'm just going to keep letting in until we slow down a little bit. And you will see the only person so far with a moustache is our guest, who is Gabriel Bergmoser. So welcome to you, Gabriel. We're really delighted to have you here today.
thanks so much for having me on.
Now, I'm not going to introduce you to everybody, but what we have before us now is a smattering of regular Thursday book lovers and people who have dropped in to see you in particular, Gabriel. So we're delighted to have everybody. For those people who don't know me, my name's Suzanne Leal. I'm the author of the novels The Teacher's Secret and The Deceptions. And Thursday Book Club is a weekly book event. It started during the lockdown last year in March, and it's continued. It's really what it is you Zoom in, and it's a no pressure book club. So no one has to get stressed because you don't have to come, you don't have to be on time, you don't have to stay the whole time, and you don't have to read anything if you don't want to. I just thought, I always get nervous when I've got all these responsibilities and I have to read things and have to think of something clever to say. So I thought, if I'm going to start one myself, I'm going to make it really relaxed. And it's been very nice. But what we do as a special occasion is once a month, at the end of the month, we have a guest author. And today we've got more than a guest author, we've got a guest author, playwright, screenwriter. And I must say, Gabriel, I was watching one of the videos where you were speaking on it, and a bloke was dancing and he looked remarkably like you. Sort of started the whole thing with this parkour sort of dance. And I thought, well, is he a dancer as well? Turned out it was an ad, and I don't think it was you.
No, definitely not.
Suffice to say, he's a man who does a lot. I'm just going to give you a quick introduction, Gabe, and we'll get started. So by my calculations, you've had 2 adult novels published, 4 novels for young adults. You've written over 15 plays and a musical. But in your spare time, you found time to found the production company Bitten by Productions. Have I missed out anything, or is that about it?
No, I mean, that pretty much sounds like it covers the bulk of it, which probably makes me sound like a little bit more auspicious than I actually am. But yeah, no, that is the vast majority of the stuff that I do.
It does make me feel that you must not sleep very much. Is that
no? It's more that it's less that I don't sleep. It's more that I don't have social life. I think is probably the word for it. Which has worked during lockdown. It's pretty much writing and puzzles has been the majority of my life for the last 2 years.
Fantastic. My first question, when I read your CV, I'm thinking, okay, so you're someone who does a lot of different things, but if everything was put out on a table and you had to choose just one thing, what would you choose? For example, would you write a novel for an adult or for a young adult? Or would you write a play, or would you write something?
That's such a hard question because I feel like all of the different pursuits scratch different itches, if that makes sense. Because like people ask me often, what do I prefer? Do I prefer writing for adults or writing for young adults? I mean, if you've read some of my books, you'll know that the territory that is in The Hunt and the Inheritance is very drastically different from what's kind of going on in The True Color of Little White Lie, which is, a lot more gentle and sweet kind of coming of age type story. And I don't know, I mean, I guess like plays feel like they afford you more of a chance to sort of do whatever you want because, theater is a little bit less high stakes, I guess, just because there's just sort of less money in it in general. So it sort of feels like, the stakes aren't quite as high because you're not necessarily going out worried about it making money because your immediate baseline assumption is that it won't make any money. So I do like the freedom that theatre offers, but I also kind of like the depth that writing a novel offers, where you can explore characters and delve into your themes and ideas in a richer, deeper, more articulate way, probably, than like the stage or the screen offers. So I mean, I guess I probably wouldn't be able to give up writing novels, and I wouldn't be able to give up being able to have that, I guess, that comparative depth of character and theme. And I guess I would probably have to go with, I'd probably keep writing for adults, but I would miss the other ones so much.
Oh, that's really interesting. What I find interesting about what you've said there is the getting in deep when you're writing a novel. Now, part of that for me is having other people's help, which is you have an editor's help and you have a publisher's help to structure the book and then copy edit it. And my question is, when you're writing plays, and I'm not a playwright, do you have that overseeing, or do you have that mentoring or collaborative work that helps hone a play?
Look, I think if you're half good at writing theatre, I'm not saying that I am, but I think that your first step needs to be viewing it as teamwork and viewing it as an act of collaboration, which theatre is. Theatre is an inherently collaborative medium. And I think that you as a playwright would be stupid if you didn't court help and opinions and external eyes on your work. You know, I mean, in writing a novel, you have it inherently there with your editor, with your publisher, with the whole team. In theatre, particularly independent theatre, it's not as, I guess it's not as immediately present. You know, I mean, in theory, you could just write plays and put them on yourself, and you don't ever really need to answer to anyone. And yeah, I know plenty of playwrights who do that, and plenty of playwrights who wouldn't listen to anybody's opinions, let alone the opinions of anybody who told them that what they were writing was anything less than the utmost brilliance. But I'm probably too deeply insecure to ever not listen to people who like might, you know, give me advice or tell me what works and what doesn't work. So particularly with my theatre company, Bitten by Productions, and with our wider family of, you know, the actors, the dramaturgs, the directors, the people who we've worked with extensively over the years, any play that I put on, I'll court opinions from pretty much everybody involved in that extended network. And what I tend to do is, because, you know, I guess I don't have an editor as such overseeing it, but what I'll do is that I'll collate all of the notes I get from everybody, and then I'll get a highlighter and I highlight all the things that are consistent across all the notes. Because I think, you know, when one person says something, you sort of have to decide, do I agree with that or do I not agree with that? And I think you owe it to yourself to interrogate whether you think they have a point or not. And it's okay if you think they don't, but I think you need to be able to explain why you think they don't. But if, you know, 5, 6, 7, 10 people are all saying the same thing, then that's when you probably are going to want to address it, because that is a pretty good barometer for how your audience are going to react as well. So I think the short answer is that in theatre, it's a lot more on you to find those opinions. But, you know, I think it's important that you do.
This year's been a particularly busy year for you. It's been an odd year for everybody, but a very productive and busy year, in that you've had 2 novels released. Now, the first one is this one, which is The True Colour of a Little White Lie. I'm just putting that up there so you can recognise it, but just also look at the cover. I must say, when I was sent this book, it popped for me. And there are a lot of covers that don't grab me, but this one really did it. Can you tell me just quickly, Gabe, what's this book and what inspired it?
So the True Color of the White Lie was effectively me taking all of my most humiliating high school anecdotes, and God knows I have a lot of them, and just pouring them all into a novel. You know, all of those like toe curling memories that you never ever want anybody to know about ever. And then in an act of, I guess, some kind of masochism, putting it in a book for, you know, people everywhere to read. So it's basically a story about a 14-year-old kid called Nelson who's in year 8 at school, and things just aren't going well for him. Like his best / only friend has moved away. His crush has just rejected him in quite humiliating fashion. The school bully only has eyes for him. Effectively, you know, he's a kid who just wants to escape from himself and escape from the drudgery of his day-to-day life. And he finds the opportunity to do that when his parents take over a ski lodge at a nearby resort. And every weekend when he's up at the lodge, he realizes that he can reinvent himself, because nobody at the lodge realizes that he's supposed to be a loser. But reinvention's complicated, and what he quickly finds is that the little white lies he tells people to make himself seem cooler than he is start to take on a life of their own and start to spiral out of control. And what he finds himself in is a situation where he's trying to balance all of these different identities and all of these different little fictions that he's spun. And of course, it all spirals out of control in hopefully a very cringy but very funny sort of way. So it's a hugely personal book. Like a lot of it, like I said, it's stuff taken from my own high school experiences, but also when I was 14, my parents did run a ski lodge on Mount Buller. I grew up in Mansfield, and that was such a massively, I guess, transformative experience for me, because it really was that feeling of being like, you have another world where you can go to and you can be somebody else. And that's a hugely intoxicating thing when you're a teenager and you're kind of like struggling with who you are and with where you fit in, and the I guess the burgeoning sense that maybe you don't fit in as much as other people do. And that was just an experience that in real life, it was nowhere near as exciting or explosive as any what Nelson goes through in the book. But it was something that really stuck with me and something that I always wanted to explore in fiction. And I'm just so immensely lucky that HarperCollins and Lisa Berryman, a publisher who we both share, who is brilliant, has basically given me the chance to tell this story and explore it and expand on it, and hopefully bring it to readers who like it.
And not only readers who like it, film goers who like it as well. Tell me about that news. What's happening with the film production?
Yeah, so True Color has been optioned as a feature film by Pirate Size Productions, who are a Melbourne-based production company who specialize in children and teenagers content. And so I've done a bit of work with Pirate Size before. I've been in a couple of writers' rooms for some of their shows. So they've currently got a really major production with Apple TV. They're doing a TV show for them at the moment that's like quite high profile, and there'll be more news kind of coming out about that in the meantime. And they've also done some stuff for ABC Kids and Sesame Studios and everything. So they're a company whose star is really on the rise. And because I know them well, when they approached me about optioning True Color, it was just 100% the right people for it. I can confirm at this point that I'm not writing the film. So I did write the first draft of the screenplay. We got a really generous funding grant from the Australian Children's Television Foundation for a first draft. And basically just got to the point where I think ultimately the realization was that because the story is so inherently personal, it can be hard as an author when you're transposing it to a different medium to step away from that and to step away from this ownership that you have over it, and that in a novel you kind of can have, whereas a film has different requirements. And so basically, like with My Blessing, we've sort of started a conversation about like finding a different writer, and we found a really, really exciting screenwriter with a really great voice. And I just absolutely cannot wait to see what she brings to the table. But I think she's kind of working on her draft at the moment, and then we're going to sort of see what comes from here. There's been another funding grant that's come in, which has kind of kept the process going along. And then next thing, I guess it'll be going to probably Netflix and Stan and the streamers and just seeing if anybody's interested.
So the idea is that it would premiere on Netflix. Is it
I think that's kind of what they're going for, just because like those sort of teen-centric films, which is what True Color would be, nowadays tend to go to Netflix and Stan before they do to cinemas, because I think the landscape's changing drastically across the board. And part of that's COVID and part of that's just changing habits and the way people view things. But, obviously nobody's closed off to a theatrical release. That would be awesome. But it does feel like these kind of films are the sort of films that tend to have more of a home on streaming services than they do in cinemas at the moment.
After the True Color of Old Little White Lie came out, this book came out only a couple of months later. I think I've got the order correct. Is that right? And this is called The Inheritance. Now, this is quite a different book. This is This is a pumping, rolling, frightening, horror, action-filled. You tell me about it, Gabe. What's this book about?
I think there's two ways to look at The Inheritance. Like, one is if you read my book, The Hunted, which came out last year. The Inheritance is, I guess, technically a sequel to The Hunted, but it's written as a standalone. So The Hunted introduced us to the character of Maggie, who I've always seen Maggie as, imagine like Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, cross with John Wick, cross with Jack Reacher, in the body of a 23-year-old girl. And she was a character who kind of snuck up on me. Like when I wrote The Hunted, I was, as True Color probably indicates, in, I guess, my fictional alter ego Nelson, I was a very, genre horror thriller obsessed kid, and I'd never really written in that territory before. So The Hunted was kind of my chance to really explore that and push it. But about halfway through writing The Hunted, that magical thing happens that sometimes happens, where a character who you didn't think much of takes over the story. And that's what happened with Maggie, where I kind of introduced her. And at first I sort of had ideas about who I thought she was and what I thought her role was. And then about halfway through the book, I was like, hang on, there's a lot more going on with you than I think. And I kind of realized that there was this depth of personality and history and pain and drive and rage and all of these different things that were driving her that I was only really able to scratch the surface of in The Hunted. And so the moment I finished The Hunted, I was like, I need to know more about you. And luckily, HarperCollins felt the same. They straight away said when they signed me on the back of The Hunted, they were like, we want another book about this character. So I pretty much dove straight into writing The Inheritance when The Hunted was acquired. And The Inheritance really was my chance to get to the bottom of Maggie's story, to get to the bottom of like, why is she like this? Where did she come from? What's driving her? What was her past? And does she have a future? And so effectively, it kicks off with her living in Port Douglas. She's a fugitive, as you would know if you'd read The Hunted, but it doesn't really matter. She's living in Queensland, keeping her head down, staying out of trouble, and then trouble finds her, basically, and she steps in to deal with a problem that she probably shouldn't have got involved in, and that sets off a domino effect that will drag her back into an ultimately quite brutal confrontation with the demons of her past. And so, whereas The Hunted was a chance to kind of play in the Wake in Fright, Wolf Creek, outback horror mode, with The Inheritance, I was much more interested in trying to, I guess, play in the neo-noir territory of something more like John Wick or like the TV show Banshee. So The Inheritance isn't a horror book in the same way The Hunted was, but it's an action-packed chase thriller set in Melbourne. And the fun of it was taking well-known locations in my home city and making them the settings for these, brutal bruising chases with like violent bikies and crooked cops and all of kind of the crazy fun stuff. So it was just an absolute blast to write from start to finish. And on top of that, like apart from the fact that I just had a huge amount of fun writing it, it was also a really gratifying chance to just get to know this character more and to really end in a place where I was like, there's so much more I want to tell about you. And it seems so far that audiences are responding to her probably more than they did in The Hunted and The Inheritance, which kind of makes you feel like maybe you got it right, which is a really good feeling as a writer, because when you're living with something by yourself for so long, you just never know.
Look, I think that's right. I think The Inheritance is a more introspective book in that
Absolutely.
we are getting to know her. And what you've done interestingly, I think, in The Inheritance is your prologue. So we know from the beginning, don't we? Even if you haven't read The Hunted, we know that Maggie has a difficult father. We know that she's taken a whole lot of money. She's about to take off and she's looking for a mother she hasn't seen for a long time. Is this a road trip book?
Yeah, I think in a weird way, one of my favorite books growing up was On the Road, Jack Kerouac, because I mean, as I think pretty much every 15-year-old wannabe writer at some point goes through a Kerouac phase. And, I very much did. Now, I'm one of those people who's always been obsessed with, the idea of the road trip, but never been brave enough to actually take one myself. So when I wrote The Hunted, if you've read The Hunted, there's the character of Simon, who's a sort of sensitive uni student who has gone off on this road trip to find himself, and he's a very, very thinly veiled stand-in for me. And he meets Maggie, and then he gets caught up in the Sturm and Drang, I guess, of The Hunted, and things don't go particularly well for him, which was, maybe an act of like, self-brutalizing in some ways. But I guess writing that character was kind of in some ways me sort of poking fun at the fact that I'm somebody who seems to write about road trips a lot, but never really takes them. And The Inheritance, that I guess that fascination found its way into The Inheritance as well, because a big chunk of The Inheritance early on is Maggie's journey from Queensland all the way down to Melbourne, and a lot of the like strange landmarks along the way. And I don't know, I think that there just always will be something inherently compelling about the journey and about the long journey and about the open road, and the idea that you could imagine scoring a lot of these scenes with like Bruce Springsteen songs and kind of really giving that sense of like the opera of the open highway. So I mean, yeah, I think it's a chase thriller ultimately, but there is absolutely a road trip element to it, and that was there in The Hunted as well.
let's stay with The Hunted for a moment. Now, generally amongst my writers' friends, this is what happens. You write a book, you try and get an agent. If you get an agent, the agent tries to sell the finished book to a publisher and you're on your way. That's not what happened with The Hunter. What happened with The Hunted?
Yeah, so with The Hunted, I'd been put in contact with Tara Wynn at Curtis Brown, who was my, spoiler alert, my now agent, a few years ago. And I'd had a different agent prior to that who I didn't have a very good relationship with for a litany of boring reasons. But basically, at that point I'd had the three Boone Shepherd books published, or I think the first two had come out at that point, which were my like YA Tintin meets Doctor Who set in the world of Lemony Snicket sort of quirky adventure books I wrote a few years ago. And so Tara was interested in potentially representing me, but obviously she needed something to represent. And I had this manuscript at the time that I had been working on from high school. Like it was my first novel that I wrote in high school that I had just revisited time and time again and kept trying to like rewrite, rework, find its way to something that was readable or sellable. And I sent that to Tara and she read it and she was like, look, good, but not quite. Here's some notes. So then I sent her the first draft of what would become True Color. And she was like, good, but not quite. Here are some notes. I sent her the first book again, which I'd reworked. And she was like, it just doesn't really work, which was kind of what I needed to hear because I'd been hanging on to that story for so long. And it sort of put me in this position where I just was like, well, I need to give her something different. I can't just keep giving her the same two books reworked over and over again because eventually she'll stop replying to my emails. And frankly, I was astounded at that point that she hadn't stopped replying to my emails yet. So I'd had this idea for ages of, the road trip that went wrong in middle of nowhere, Australia. And I wrote The Hunted really quickly and sort of read over it and I was happy with it, but I wasn't, it felt like I was rushing it, but I couldn't really figure out what else to do to it. So I sent it to Tara. I waited for the email back saying, please get help. I'm sending the padded van to your house right now. And she got back and she really liked it. But what she did that was really savvy was that she sold the film rights first. So she went out to an agent who she works with in LA, Jerry Kalajian, who sold the film rights to like Big Little Lies and The Life of Pi, and I think maybe The Wolf of Wall Street as well, like quite a few really high profile projects. And Jerry got back within 2 days. Like he read it really quickly and straight away got to work kind of putting it out in LA and doing the rounds with it, which was absolutely insane for me. And it was on the back of the film rights selling that Tara then went out with the manuscript and then went out with like selling the book to publishers here in Australia. And it sold really, really quickly. But I think the cleverest thing that she did was to make sure that she had the film interest already on the table when she started going to publishers with it, because it straight away makes it a more appealing proposition. So I've just been incredibly fortunate in that I just have the most brilliant literary agent in the world, basically.
So does that mean that you were writing a screenplay and fixing up or editing the novel at the same time?
Essentially, yeah. So, I mean, obviously I'd written the first draft before I started even thinking about writing a screenplay because, I was disbelieving that the novel could sell, let alone that a film could sell as well. But naturally, as anybody would know who knows much about writing, you'll sell the first draft, and then obviously there will be lots of changes and tweaks and reworkings and all kinds of things that happen with it. So a lot of the extensive rewrites that sort of made The Hunted what it ended up being, I was doing simultaneous to writing the screenplay for Stampede Ventures and Vertigo Entertainment in LA, who are the two companies who are making the film. And so that was a really weird process because films and books have very different requirements, and there's stuff you can do in a book that you can't do in a film, and some of that stuff is really just like technical. I mean, in a book you can have an extended chapter where you go into a character's backstory and you flesh out their history by just showing you that history, but in a film you can't really do that without breaking momentum, and you can't really have like internal monologues that shed light on what characters are thinking at any given moment. So you have to find other ways to convey the same information in an ultimately visual way, unless you want to rely on an abundance of voiceover, which nobody did. So it was a difficult process in some parts because I had to sometimes in the same day jump between having my novelist hat on and then having my screenwriter hat on and try to find different ways to achieve the same ultimate purpose. But I think in a lot of ways they kind of enriched each other because working on rewriting the book and deepening the characters and exploring their backstories more informed the film in a lot of ways, but then also working on finding more compelling, punchy visual ways to tell the story in the film helped give some of that filmic quality back to the novel. So it kind of became a bit of a symbiotic writing process in some ways, but I think ultimately it was really beneficial for both.
And did it really enhance the dialogue for The Hunted? And my second question is, did that experience help in writing the novel for The Inheritance? That doing
Yeah, so yeah, I think it absolutely did. I mean, ultimately, I think I have a playwright's heart in that I love writing dialogue and I love writing extended bantery scenes between characters. And, so The Hunted was a weird one because dialogue is probably my favorite thing to write, but The Hunted didn't have a huge amount of opportunity for a lot of, that kind of back and forth theatrical banter between people because, these are characters hunkered down the roadhouse being, shot at by human hunting cannibals. There's not a huge amount of time for, the back and forth witty, snappy dialogue. Whereas The Inheritance, which was playing more in that noir play box, it felt a lot more natural to have that kind of hard-boiled dialogue there because, noir films traditionally always have that really kind of, clipped, direct, sort of slightly ridiculous but really fun dialogue. And so I was able to kind of bring that back a little bit in The Inheritance because The Inheritance is inherently a slightly slower, more introspective book that actually just has time for the characters to sit and talk to each other. And I mean, likewise, I've just had, if people have read The Inheritance, one of the characters in The Inheritance, I've just carried over to an Audible original that's just dropped in the last couple of weeks, The Consequence. And that plays even more into like the kind of hard-boiled noir sandbox, Melbourne noir, I guess you'd call it. And I just had so much fun in that because the character of Jack Carlin, who, if you've read The Inheritance, you'll know is kind of a very quippy, sort of snarky, funny, fun character whose dialogue can be that like real kind of old-fashioned noir style. He's the protagonist in this Audible original. And so I had a huge amount of fun writing just the most ridiculous hard-boiled noir dialogue for him. But yeah, it was a real, it was a huge amount of fun. And I think that, writing any screenplay or any play really always does help when it comes to writing dialogue.
That's there's so much to ask you about that. We've coming to 8:30. So what I'm going to do now is just open the floor to book clubbers. Because there's because of how we're structuring it today, rather than asking you to unmute and ask your question, can you just pop it in a chat function? I'll just have a quick chat to Gabe while those questions are coming in. If you don't have questions, that's fine as well. There's been a lot that we've covered, a lot that Gabe's talked about. What I wanted to know, Gabe, was about a follow-up YA novel that you're writing. Can you? I know it's early days, but what can you talk about with that? Anything?
So this is where I confirm that the 10-year project I told you guys about before that I was working on before The Hunted sold, this new YA book is a reworking of that story. So I kind of finally got it across the line. So I have sort of spent the last few months, I guess, starting that story again from scratch and bringing to bear a lot of what I've learned through the process of writing The Hunted, The Inheritance, and The True Color of Little White Lie. And in doing so, hopefully, I guess, helped realize a version of this story that finally works. And so it is a YA novel, but it's very different to True Color. It's a lot darker. Basically, it follows a 17-year-old kid, Leo Gray, who is effectively the Dorian Gray archetype. He's charming, he's good looking, he's got the nice girlfriend, he's a straight A student, everything's going well for him, he's charismatic, and he's just received a publishing deal for his first novel. So he's like, now he's got the teenage prodigy thing on top of all of that. And one night, well, the night he finds out about his publishing deal, his best friend says to him, "Hey man, why don't we go out and like have a big party to celebrate?" And he's not really a party animal, but he's lacking inspiration. So he kind of thinks maybe this will sort of spark some ideas. So he goes along to the party and he basically just has a miserable time. Like, it's not his scene. He can't stand it. And he tries to sneak out, but he gets bailed up by the school football star, who's very drunk. And he's there with this girl who's like passed out drunk. And the football star's like, "Hey man, do you reckon you can drive us to the bottle shop and get us some more booze?" And at first, Leo, the main character, is like, "Well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not really comfortable with that." But he's also kind of worried that the football star is going to drive himself if he says no. So even though he doesn't have a license, he agrees. He gets in the car, they drive, and the football star is kind of belligerent and drunk. And halfway to the bottle shop, he starts an argument, which starts a fight, which leads to a car crash. And Leo gets out of the car's smoking, he's unharmed, but he's shaken, he doesn't know what to do. the football star's like passed out in the front seat, like, knocked unconscious, he's bleeding. The girl's in the back and she's like waking up and she's unharmed, but, doesn't really know what's happened. He hears sirens and he just runs.
Oh,
Like
no.
instinctively, he just runs. He can't stay. And he spends the weekend kind of waiting for the police to knock on his door and they never turn up. And he arrives back at school and finds out that the football star, Gus, is in a coma. And the girl, Jess, was found outside the car, totally disoriented. And the police assume that she was driving. So the whole school now turns on her because they basically think that she was irresponsible and put the school's favorite son in a coma. And that puts Leo in a situation where he has to decide, do I come forward and ruin my reputation, ruin my life, ruin my career before it's even started? Or do I say nothing and let an innocent person take the blame for what I've done? And that's the setup from which it kind of spirals into something quite dark and quite twisted and very, very different to True Color. But it's something I'm really, really excited about.
Oh, sounds fascinating. Thanks for that. Thanks for, so you got it here, Thursday Book Club.
This is the first time I've pitched it. So there you go.
We've got a question for you, and the question's from Dina Davis, who's one of our book clubbers and also a writer who spends most of her time in Darwin. Her latest book is A Dangerous Daughter. Dina says, what's your most effective promotion strategy, Gabriel?
I wish I had one. I seriously wish I was better at promotion. I know so many people like writers and also actors and everything who are really across it when it comes to like social media, when it comes to Instagram, when it comes to Facebook, when it comes to like, knowing how to, I guess, play the algorithms to make sure that the work gets in front of the right eyes and all of that. I've just never, ever been good at that kind of thing. I mean, I guess if I had anything, it's that I tend to find that when you share a personal story behind the story, that tends to get more of a reaction from people because I think that like across the board, lifting the curtain is always a really interesting thing for your readers. And, I don't do it as much as I used to because I don't have much time, but, I try to maintain a pretty candid blog where, I kind of talk about sort of what's going on behind the scenes and the realities of being a writer and all of that. And, I don't really believe in authors. I mean, it's different for every author, but I don't really believe in like kind of staying separate from my readers. Like I like to kind of make myself as accessible to them as possible, whether that's via Twitter, whether that's via any other social media sphere, whether that's just via the contact page on my website. Like I reply to every email that comes my way about stories and all of that. But also like when it comes to sharing things, I try not to, as much as possible, I try not to do it in that way of being like, read my new book, everyone. I try to kind of, invite readers in a little bit, with what's going on behind the scenes or why this matters to me or what I was thinking about when I wrote it. And, I don't think that really answers your question because I don't know if that's an effective strategy, but that's what feels natural to me and seems to get a bit of a reaction. But I really don't know. It's just not my forte.
And we've got a question now from Chris. And Chris is, question is, Gabriel, is the novel you just pitched Windmills?
Yes, it is. So, well, that was the original title. So it won't be called Windmills on publication. So Windmills was the title of the version I was working on for over a decade. This new version, my first I guess my first port of call when it came to coming back to retelling this story was that I had to stop thinking of it as Windmills because Windmills was a really certain thing that was characterized by a really certain time in my life. And I was like, no, I'm taking the characters, the themes, and several elements of the plot, but I'm using them I'm rearranging them into a new book that is the natural evolution of Windmills, but I can't keep calling it Windmills or thinking of it as Windmills because in a weird way that comes with baggage that isn't going to help the story or help me. So that's a very, very writerly reply that probably doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but that's just kind of how I had to think about it. But yes, for all intents and purposes, it is Windmills.
We've got a comment from Dina that says, thank you, Gabriel. I agree readers like the personal touch. And of course, Dina's new book is a personal book as well. Another question that we have is about the writing process. What's your writing process? Do you write every day? Do you separate the tasks? How do you do it?
I try to write every day just because I think it is important. But that said, what I write every day isn't necessarily going to be, the latest novel or whatever. Like, if it's a blog, if it's something just for me, if it's a short story, I just kind of think it's good to keep in that habit. But that said, I don't write on weekends anymore. Like I used to, really bully myself into writing every single day, whereas now I'm a little bit more like, just I guess ever since writing has become my full-time job, it's become very obvious to me that I need some kind of separation, and I need, the time and space to not think about writing as much as that's possible when, it is the main thing that you think about most of the time. But yeah, so I get up at 6 most days. I sort of, do some things in the morning, like just kind of, little bits and pieces, little routine things, take my dog for a walk and try to think through what I want to write about that day. And then I'll normally write through until about like 12 or 1. And once I get to about that point, and this is during COVID times because I'm a notorious pub writer. So like if we weren't in COVID times, I'd be down at my local tapping away down there. But yeah, normally I kind of tend to write until about the early afternoon. And then it's in the afternoon that I'll do all the kind of other admin-y stuff, like whether it's, replying to emails or filling out like, or coming up with promotional pitch documents, or all of those kind of like little things that are a bit less fun than the actual writing. But I find that morning is generally a better time for it because I guess you're more fresher and you're more like, you're just kind of, it feels a bit more, you have more energy to dive into it than you do later in the day, I think.
We've got another question from Chris, and this is his question, or 2 questions. Regarding your love of writing dialogue, do you come up with it going off into daydreams, imagine it, then write it down as it comes like a natural conversation? That's the first option. Or does dialogue get iterated again and again, like a scene description might get tweaked for tone?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all of the above, really. So I mean, before I put, I want to say the romantic thing, pen to paper, but in reality, let's face it, it's fingers to keys. Before I put fingers to keys any day, like the first thing I'll do is go for a walk and like think through the scenes I want to write that day. And if they're dialogue heavy scenes, then I'll kind of basically have a conversation with myself. And so, I think there's a lot of people on my local dog walk path who just think I'm a crazy person because, I'm walking my dog and I'm sort of gesturing and speaking and, like, then, I'll kind of end up in a situation where I'll come up with some really good little exchanges that I want to remember, but I don't ever bring my phone with me. So I have no means of like noting it down. So I'm like hurrying home, trying to like remember all of these like little kind of back and forth that I've come up with that I think are really good. But then, I guess I'll sort of know the shape of the conversation then, but the actual writing of the dialogue, I do just kind of let flow like a natural conversation and just kind of let the characters speak to each other in a way that feels natural. Because like if you know the characters well and if the characters feel strong, then you don't really need to do a lot. You kind of just let them say what they're going to say. And if you understand them, then there isn't really that tends to be fairly straightforward. But then, of course, in the aftermath of actually writing the scene, because I, again, I naturally gravitate to writing a lot of dialogue and probably more dialogue than I should. I've had to become very good at going back and just like, cutting huge swathes of it or working through and just being like, that's not necessary. He said that already. She said that already. That doesn't make any sense. That's not particularly articulate. And then just kind of, once I've kind of got it all out, that's when I kind of come at it with the hammer and the chisel and just sort of work off all the parts that don't need to be there until eventually, hopefully you come up with something that is entertaining to read.
Fantastic. That's so instructive, really instructive, because of course you can cut down too much, but you can't. Yeah. It's much harder to make more from little.
Well, and that's the thing, you always want to have too much that you can pull back on than have not enough that you have to try to pump up, because that I think is when a story starts to feel really strained. And I think it's always very obvious. And God knows I've read enough books where, you can just tell that the author didn't really have enough material to fill the page count, but they've just tried to like pump it up with too much introspection or too many superfluous subplots. And as a reader, I always find that really frustrating. Like if I don't feel like there is a clear reason for me to be reading something, I get bored very, very quickly. Like, if I'm just like, why is this character here? Why is this scene here? What's happening? I think that your first responsibility to your reader is to make sure that they never, ever feel like their time is being wasted. And, you can't guarantee that, but you can try.
You know what, Gabriel, I think we've come to the end of our time. What I want to do is ask you a couple of last questions. The first one, and I'll explain this as we go along, give me a number between 1 and 17, please.
13.
Yes, I mean, that's my birthday. It's my favorite number. There wasn't a right or wrong answer. I'll just leave that one with me for a moment. And next question is 3 books. 3 books you can recommend for Thursday Book Club members.
First one, here's one I prepared earlier. Only Killers and Thieves by Paul Howarth. I finished recently, and it's an Australian book. It's an outback Western set in the 1800s, and it is probably the best book I've read in years. Like, it is just, some books you read, particularly thrillers, and it's a bit like fast food, like you read it, you enjoy it, and then you kind of forget about it afterwards, or it leaves you feeling a bit sick. Whereas Paul Howarth, what he writes, it's like a feast. Like, you are just absolutely lost in it. The prose is so vivid, the characters are so rich, and the story is so compelling. Like, it is one of those books where you just feel like every inch of it has been so meticulously crafted, and it's such a fascinating story that is fiction, but speaks to a lot of truths about, I guess, where we came from as a nation, and uncomfortable truths at that. But it's a brilliant book, and its sequel has just come out, which is just as good. So, I can't recommend Paul Howarth enough. The other one, which I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with, is Tana French. So Tana French is my favorite author. Faithful Place is my favorite of her books. It's her third, but I would recommend starting with In the Woods. So she's written a series of 6 books where every book focuses on a different detective in the same murder squad. But all of them are brilliant standalone novels. But when you read them together, they're just like, they're all enriched. But, she's another one where, the writing is like a feast. Like, it's just so rich, so vivid, so deep, so beautiful. She's one of the few writers I can think of where I will read a passage and be just I'll be breathless, because it's just so good, and it's so powerful, and it's so impactful and intoxicating. I think Tana French really revitalized and re-energized my understanding of what a good book could be when I first read her. As for the third recommendation, I didn't think this one through. I guess maybe this is a form of nepotism or cronyism, but I would highly recommend Jack Heath's books. So he's written a trilogy, not a trilogy because there's a 4th one coming, but a series of quite dark crime thrillers, the Hangman books. So Hangman, Hunter, and Hideout, which are quite, ghoulishly fun, but, quite bleak. But his newest book has just come out as an Audible original, and also it's coming out as a novel in a couple of months' time, which is called Kill Your Brother. And basically it's about a girl whose brother has gone missing. She ends up tracking him down and gets caught by the same kidnapper, who gives her 48 hours to kill her brother, otherwise they both die.
Oh, no.
And that's the setup for it. But it is so compelling, and it is so packed full of twists. And it has a twist at the end that if you see it coming, you're just a genius. There's just no, and I'm somebody who looks for twists because I love a good twist. I knew there was going to be one because there always is a twist in Jack's books. But the whole book I was looking for it, and then it came, and it was that best kind of twist where you simultaneously are going, I never could have seen that coming, but you're also going, of course, all the signs were there. So, just if you want just a really, really clever, compelling, unputdownable thriller, then that's out in a couple of months, or you can listen to it now on Audible, and it's great.
Fantastic. I must say, I've read Hunter, and Hunter's about a cannibal, but a very likable cannibal. It's extraordinary premise, and he pulls it off.
I don't know how he does it.
Terrific, terrific. 13 is the lucky raffle number, and the number 13 today, according to my participant list, is Rowena Eddy. So you're the lucky winner, Rowena. So if you can send me an email with your postal address, you'll be getting a raffle surprise win in your mail. So thank you so much, Gabe, for talking to us with such enthusiasm, with such verve, and many congratulations on the outstanding achievements, on the books to come, on the books that have come out this year, and of course on all the best wishes for The Hunted and for the True Colour of a Little White Lie in film production. So we'll be watching your progress with amazement, I think, and excitement. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Suzanne, and thanks for having me, everyone.
And we'll see you. So we're taking a break until the 14th of October. So see everybody back on the 14th. Have a safe holiday, and talk to you soon. See you. Bye-bye, Gabe.
See ya.
Oh,